Yo, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy Naruto Explain here, bringing you a news update for Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 20. And today we have spoilers coming to us via the official Naruto website for the upcoming manga chapter, which this month's chapter will be out sooner than the last few. This month, the chapter will release on the 18th, which means, as always, depending on when we get the fully translated chapter and the full spoilers, I'll either have the chapter review video up on the day of the official release or a couple of days after if we don't have everything in full before the 18th. So once again, I thank you guys for your patience and your understanding and your support for the chapter reviews themselves. So this set of chapter spoilers is going to be coming to us again from the official Naruto website, which means this is information Shueisha wants you to know as fans in order to drive up the hype for the next chapter. Based on what we have, they've made the bold decision to keep us waiting to see Konohamaru's fate, which is what most of us, I would say, want to see. Instead, the focus this time is going to be on Mitsuki versus RYU, and the battle between Sage Mode, Mitsuki, and RYU, it is definitely heating up here. Which, can we take a moment to appreciate how a battle that was originally anime only in the form of Shinki versus Mitsuki is now being carried out in manga format via Shinki's Ten Tails clone and Mitsuki. And unlike the anime, we're seeing Mitsuki's full Sage Mode at full power here. If you told me this back when I was getting caught up on Boruto's anime back in summer of 2019, that this would be a fight in the manga, I'd call you a liar. What we see from these two is pretty interesting when you start breaking down the panels themselves. So RYU is continuing to fight from a distance using his Iron Sand, and Mitsuki is doing the same thing with his Sage Mode stakes. It is basically clashes of snakes versus Iron Sand, and the contrast here, it is so aesthetically pleasing, particularly the way that the Iron Sand is being shaded with just enough black spots but also enough white on it in order to add the glitter effect. As someone who read most of Naruto's manga weekly, I do appreciate the difference in what we're seeing here. When Kishimoto was using the Iron Sand, he went with more of a jet black appearance, versus what we see Ikimoto doing here is more based in realism. So that extra sheen and gloss, it is a really nice touch here. When you think of what Iron Sand would look like in real life, this is it. Especially when you have the sunlight and everything hitting, that is very, very accurate. However, the first thing that also comes to mind here is how exactly is Mitsuki battling RYU? We know based on what we've seen in the past that RYU, when he uses the Iron Sand, he can control the bodies of people and make them move against their will. Yet here we see Mitsuki is battling alone against RYU, and he doesn't appear as if his body's been affected, and neither have his Sage Mode snakes. Now, if you'll recall, at the end of the last chapter, RYU managed to capture that Iron Sand sword that Shinki made for Araya, which was what allowed Sarada and Mitsuki the opportunity to battle RYU, getting around both sides of the hacks of his ability. The first ability being able to control people against their will by using the Iron Sand, and the second where RYU can force his body to break apart. So what that Iron Sand sword did is force him to reform himself whenever he would break apart into sand particles to hide, and it basically took away the advantage of being in a desert setting, because when you really think about it, that is a massive home field advantage for RYU. It'll be very interesting to see if there are potential side effects to that sword being taken by one of the claw grimes, and to see if maybe that is interfering with this particular power. That's the one thing that's been bugging me ever since the spoiler page dropped. Why isn't RYU trying to control their bodies, or rather Mitsuki's body, while they're fighting? This could be an instance of something that has always remained true with Naruto fights, even in Boruto, which is that every jutsu has a weakness, and the longer and more often you use a jutsu against someone, the more likely you are to figure out the weakness of the jutsu, especially in the case of what we have here on the battlefield with Sarada and Mitsuki. One has a Sharingan that can break down all jutsu, including Kekkei Genkai jutsu, even though she can't copy the Kekkei Genkai for obvious reasons, and the other is a clone of one of the biggest prodigies in the entire Naruto franchise. Between that and any prior knowledge that Yodo and Araya might be in possession of when it comes to Shinki's jutsu, there might be a less effective way to counter this Iron Sand and Puppet Master combo attack that RYU has been using to control bodies, and it might be something that is in effect. It could be something as simple as what we saw when Konoha, in particular Tsunade, figured out, hey, if we run our chakra a certain way between our feet, we can cancel out what the Deva path is doing. It'll be very interesting to see if there's something similar to that. Now, this is where it also gets even more interesting, is that RYU appears to be on a defensive here, jumping backwards to create space, which is another reason I'm curious to see if they found another weakness to his jutsu. Based on what we've seen in the past, what is the one constant that RYU was doing when battling Sarada and Mitsuki? Whenever they hit him with attacks, he didn't try to dodge so much as he went straight to use that Hack's ability of his to soften the blow of the attacks in order to avoid full damage from being inflicted. That's why we had Sarada and Mitsuki getting very annoyed that they couldn't get full damage on the guy, that the attacks there are always too shallow. When they hit him more than once with enough force to cause him visible discomfort and groan in pain, despite him being in the process of breaking apart his body to avoid the full extent of the attacks. What changed to allow Mitsuki this opportunity? If he was previously having to do such a thing, why would he avoid it now? Why jump backwards to dodge an attack unless it was absolutely required for him? That's something that we'll likely get an answer to later on when the full spoilers drop in a few days. But what is also very interesting about this entire back and forth on the page is that RYU's arms, they appear to be moving on the last panel of the page, and that stands out for this following reason. He appears to be in the midst of using some type of a counterattack, either for offensive or defensive purposes, because Ikimoto is using speed lines in the background to show the sense of urgency in his movement. He is being pressured. That's as clear as day as the manga is using anticipation panels, which anticipation panels, for those guys who have never heard that term before because you're a new viewer, is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically set up for a big reveal in the next panel or the next page, which is what we call the impact shot or the impact panel. Like say you're winding up a fist and then you're throwing the fist forward, those are anticipation panels. But the impact shot is where you have the larger panel being used for a dramatic shot, like say a Rasengan connecting with a massive force or something of that nature. Like a great example from the last chapter is when we get that reveal where we see Shinki's sword that he's using, like the chakra or Araya sword that he's using Shinki's chakra for, and Shinki's pouring it into it. That's a impact panel right there, the shot of the sword itself. Typically you have high and vertical panels for quick and dramatic movements, but you also have wide and horizontal panels for action and for conversation. It's a trick that a lot of mangaka will use in order to dictate the flow of the chapter by subconsciously making your eyes read through the chapter at a pace that they're trying to establish, which in Ikimoto's case, if you notice, Boruto chapters, even though they're 40 pages, they are structured in a way where you begin going through them in only 2 or 3 minutes, if there isn't a lot of dialogue, which is why this is so interesting. Somewhere on that next couple of pages, we're getting an impact shot either from a jutsu, an attack, or there's going to be a subversion of expectations being planted into the next page in order to throw us off. Now, the other thing that I find interesting here is the extended sequence choice of Mitsuki versus RYU and the fact that they're alone here. Again, we don't know where the others are. Maybe someone rushed off to see Konohamaru before he gets eaten by Matsuri. We don't know. But having Mitsuki there, it is interesting because this allows us to do something very important. It's due to the nature of ongoing material. The scales are always sliding up and down, especially when you have someone who is as heavily influenced by Dragon Ball as Ikimoto is, both from a battle perspective as well as a paneling and writing perspective. If you've ever read Dragon Ball's manga, you can see a lot of Ikimoto's influences. The story has dropped enough nuggets to start allowing us to see where the characters are, but as per usual with how this duo of Kishimoto and Ikimoto, when they first started Boruto, it's not as DC focused anymore in terms of wide scale jutsu, and there aren't any over the top power expressions anymore. Everything is more so rooted in AP, which basically means we don't need to see characters blow up mountains anymore to know that they can do so. They can control the output of the damage to a certain selected space. And that goes back to Kishimoto's statement in 2017 that he wanted a conscious decision made to express power in a way that is different from Naruto's manga, which is fitting because that's a sequel. And Ikimoto told us in 2018 that the decision that they made was to focus more so on taijutsu and capture the feel of more fights from Naruto Part 1 and not be as over the top as the battles in Part 2 had. especially because Ikimoto did not care for the fights in part 2, which I agree with them on that. Now, with Boruto 2 Blue Vortex so far, we're seeing clear as day what they're trying to accomplish even further. The flashback of Boruto and Sasuke versus Code, it was written with base Code being stated to be, by Sasuke's own words, someone that they stood no chance against in battle. Boruto then lets us know that the battle got so intense that Boruto tried to use karma against what was base Code, which means that at that point in time, 13-year-old Boruto was still weaker than Code even when Boruto would have used karma. And so too was Sasuke, which is consistent with something that I warned you guys about when Code was being hyped up as his villain once he got his limiters removed. I said, do not be shocked if when his limiters are removed, that he's made into a measuring stick for power, the same way that Super Saiyan and Namek Saga Frieza became a measuring stick in Dragon Ball. And we saw that play out when Damon bullied Code without even trying, and then we learned that Damon wasn't even using his full power. We then jump ahead and we see RYU snatch base Code out of his claw mark, and he's holding Code hostage. Even if we make the concession that Code was off guard, the fact that Code himself was unable to break free, he was actively trying to pull RYU's Iron Sand tendril from around his body, and he's demanding that RYU let him go. That means that Code could not free himself. If he could have done so, he would have done so. But he didn't, which means that he couldn't. We at least know that RYU is stronger than base Code, but given that Jura never disputed the notion that RYU could kill Code later on his own, that adds further credence to where RYU is standing in terms of power. He's over Code, which makes what we're seeing here that much more interesting, because that duo of Sarada and Mitsuki, they force RYU to use methods to avoid heavy hits from them, which means that he's actively avoiding damage from people whose power might be relative, even if they themselves are not stronger or even as strong as RYU. That's the important thing. There's enough relativity there that he has to take those precautions, otherwise he would not be having to do so, which means that those two hit their goal of training hard enough to be able to fight against Otsutsuki, which that pays off Naruto's warning to the Kage that the kids he saw in his village, some of them had the potential to surpass all of them. Even though we weren't at a time of war, as Naruto explains, which explains why Sarada reacted to Hidari and was able to counter, because base Sharingan Aya Insight, it means nothing if your body's not able to physically react. Even with the Chidori's tunnel vision, you still have to be fast enough to get around it. And later on, Hidari was on guard when Sarada's Chidori stream hit him and did enough damage that he could not maintain his grip on her. He was groaning in pain. We know that Hidari's Chidori is strong enough that it can cancel out Boruto's Rasengan. Again, I'm not saying that Sarada and Mitsuki are as strong as base Boruto. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying if Boruto and them are, say, on tier 1, to say that those characters aren't on tier 3 or tier 3 moving into tier 2, I don't think it's that crazy. Now, we have the stuff with RYU in this chapter, and now the sneak peek. And they've leveled up enough to be relative to the threats that we've seen, where again, it's somewhere between base Code and RYU, which makes you wonder just how much of a monster Karma Seal Boruto is about to be, especially when Momoshiki takes over and we see true essence of Karma. And you also have Kawaki, who will have access to Ishiki's full attack power, plus the other methods that he has to model to use to power him up. They are setting Jura up to be an absolute monster. The fact that it's going to take a duo of Boruto potentially having to use Karma, because he tells Kawaki that's a risk, and you have Kawaki not only getting Ishiki's full attack power, but also getting other modifications like he has to model. That raises everybody's strength level up, including RYU, which that has a trickle-down effect. Again, it's very Dragon Ball-esque. It's mixing Naruto's linear scaling with the power method of Dragon Ball, and I think that's a very ambitious thing that's going on here. Now, as a quick reminder, the chapter does drop on the 18th, so again, depending on when we get the spoilers, the review may be out the same day, it may be out a little later. My editor's gonna need some time to work on the review to maintain the quality of the reviews, The full spoilers should be out any day now. In the meantime, while you wait for those, consider clicking here on the right for my new Chainsaw Man chapter review for my Anime Explained channel, or click here to watch this blind review from One Piece chapter 1104 from my Everything One Piece Explained channel, or click here on the left for this Naruto Explained video.